For an episode that had barely any dialogue, and most of it was focused on robots that couldn't talk, and the only thing they really did was at some points had some demonic screams when they were running into the explosions, this episode conveyed so many thought-provoking ideas, and I think one of the more interesting ideas that you can see in stories is the concept of machines being able to think for themselves, be able to feel emotions, or at the very least go against their initial programming. And when you look at this creature, this machine that is supposed to target these dolls, to kill and do these things, and instead decides to go the opposite direction and start to pick up on the flowers and then try to grow its own flowers, to watch over the course of 20 some odd minutes, me say, what are they doing and what is the purpose of this? To them by the end feeling so much distress because I kind of grew connected to this poor little tin bot just trying to grow flowers and in return just ended up just crushed by warfare. And NieR Automata is not playing around. This is a quality anime. For having barely any action and most of it just being watching a robot read books and try to grow flowers, some of the more thought-provoking concepts that I've seen this week in anime. Now, I do have a full live reaction to today's episode available on my Patreon if you're interested in seeing, so consider supporting if you so wish, but we gotta talk about this one. I am a big fan of stories that kind of like tiptoe on the idea of the concept of progressing technology, the fear of what if it overtakes us, what if it basically goes against its initial programming and then looks at what we've done over the course of our history and decides to wipe us out. And at that point, you have to say, like, is it even worth progressing the technology? But then you look at it on the more hopeful side and you see a creature that started off as a machine, but then you start wondering, what is humanity? What is it to be alive? And something that's going out of its way to read books, to look at the beauty of nature and try to grow and basically let that life blossom. You have to wonder, isn't that life? Isn't that something beautiful and worth protecting? But then you see all of its brethren just being carnage and destruction, and then you look at the characters we've been introduced to, like 2B, and you're like, okay, but like they're working with humans and they're protecting humans, like maybe there is a way for this type of technology to progress without it all being completely chaos. I mean, there's not many shows that casually reveal aliens are kind of responsible for some of the shit that's happened in this world, but I mean, they casually drop that information as we're watching two very different sides of the robot faction have two very different opinions of what to do. Basically, one just sweeping and killing and exploding galore, and then you have like four little bots just try to grow a giant field of flowers. And it was so interesting to see NieR go in this direction, because when you compare episode 1, it was very explosive. It was constantly showing you the sides of war and like what these characters are doing in order to protect, and hell, they have like a failsafe that if worse comes to worse, they can just blow it apart and boot themselves back up from their backups up on their ship. And then this episode comes in, and for the most part, it's focusing on just robots, these androids, right? And I was just so fascinated. My eyes were just glued to the screen being like, what are they trying to tell? But I'm so invested because post-apocalyptic worlds, I think, are definitely underrepresented in the anime market. And usually when you see them, it's more focused on like zombies and stuff like that. So to have a world that's just so breathtakingly beautiful, there's no pollution, but it's kind of depressing because you see all these exploded buildings, everything's crumbling. But at the same time, nature is kind of like taking over once again. And then you have this robot, and they did such a great directing choice. There was two moments that really sold me on the emotion of this. You have the first, which is in the rain. So obviously a robot and android can't cry, but they did this moment where basically after like picking up the flower, it starts raining, and they direct it as if the robot's crying. And then there's the moment after it gets exploded, it's basically reaching for the flower. Obviously it can't bleed, but the oil leaking from it basically looks like a hand covered in blood reaching for that last precious gift that it was so invested in. And the fact that the last shot we see is a bunch of them reading books, and it's almost as if like what we just saw here wasn't a fluke, it wasn't a one-off thing, and I'm interested to see if the direction they're trying to go with this is for humanity. They look at these machines as something that needs to be killed as they just constantly kill them, but I'm interested to see if it's going to be a very interesting divide where it's not one or four that are just trying to be more peaceful. What if half of them start trying to be peaceful? And then we have this unfortunate conundrum where now we have to consider the fact, are we even just hunting machines trying to kill us, or are we hunting something that's trying to be alive? And that type of conundrum, I would be interested to see where characters like 2B would end up going, because, I mean, from what we're seeing, like, they're mostly machines themselves, but they feel things, they feel emotions, right? And I'm interested to see the direction a show like this wants to go, because there is a lot of potential And the beautiful directing choices they're using, I mean, I can't be the only one who is getting like Magia Record Madoka Magica vibes. When there was like 3 or 4 moments where there was almost like an arts and crafts aesthetic, and they just really shifted it in order to get inside the machine's head. I like that type of stuff, and usually you only see that with Shaft, but there was a good variety of art and aesthetic choices that they used to keep everything fresh and exciting. We may not have had constant explosions and gunfire going off every other minute, but they did enough to keep the visual flair of this going, and I really enjoyed what they did. And from what I'm hearing, now people can correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently the anime is using the game's soundtrack. Now, I don't know, I can't verify that as I'm new to this world, as I've mentioned my first impressions, but I will say the music that I'm hearing in this show is top tier. So I mean, if this is just the game's music, I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest, given the fact that I mean, some of the OSTs that they were playing throughout this episode were just god tier. Like, it was that good in my opinion. I don't think that's an over-exaggeration. That was some next-level music, so I can understand maybe not wanting to try to, like, replicate or try to make something better when you just have such a great OST to work with, because I think it's working really well for the anime medium. Like, I'm a huge fan of show don't tell, where stories aren't afraid to let your mind do the thinking and walk along this path and say, ooh, maybe this is trying to connect to this, because this episode, and even episode 1, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know the true end goal of this world. We don't know the true purpose of everything we're witnessing. But what the show's doing a great job at is a simple robot walking through a destroyed world, but then it's covered in nature and it's choosing to avoid conflict and go for looking at the deer or reading a book or picking up a flower and trying to grow seeds. The fact that that can convey so much emotion and story without a single word spoken, that's how you know you have a special story on your hands. Now, this type of story isn't going to be for everyone, I get that, but this is the stuff I wish we saw more of. I mean, one of my personal all-time favorite movies is Angel's Egg. There's like 2 words spoken in that entire movie, yet it can convey so many emotions and interpretations of what to experience with that film. And the fact that this is that type of episode where it's just your mind does so many interpretations of everything, and I guarantee you, discussing this with so many different people, they're gonna have a different feeling of what everything meant. And obviously the overall idea is the concept of machines thinking for themselves and becoming their own, but it's gonna be interesting to see what happens when more and more start to walk that path of reading books and planting flowers rather than trying to kill humans, and what it will mean for characters like 2B if eventually they're basically being tasked at continuing to kill them, or, you know, maybe they'll have to go up against people and they'll have to say, like, they're just trying to be normal, like, why do we need to kill them? And it'll be interesting to see where the divide of what is human and what is alive will be, because they're doing a great job so far. But I leave another episode even more impressed than episode 1. I thought episode 1, while exciting and intriguing, this is the episode that just sucked me into this world and has me excited for the future of what machines and humans are going to look like. But thoughts and feelings yourself down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. Now, like I mentioned, full live reaction is available on the Patreon, and while you're there, you can also get yourself a video shout out like a few are about to get here. So we have Fars, Brandon Lagarde, and Wu Zhan. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care and have a good one.